Elijah Peterson rode slow. He always did now. There had been a time he rode like a man who had somewhere to go, someone to meet, something to earn. But those days had dried up like the riverbed behind him, and what remained was a steady rhythm of hoofbeats and breath and the occasional cough from his old mare, Lucy. He wasn't a lawman, wasn't a hunter, and no longer anyone's husband. Just a man with broad shoulders, hands marked with calluses, and eyes dulled by grief that had long since learned to stop weeping. Lucy halted before he even tugged the reins, her ears flattening, nostrils flaring. Elijah slid from the saddle in one practiced motion, boots crunching on gravel and dry grass. The air smelled wrong, too still, too burnt. He moved forward slowly, brushing past tall sage, and then he saw it. Wagon wheels, shattered like ribs. Canvas torn and flapping in the breeze like ghost skin. Bodies were laid out in the careless chaos of violence, faces obscured by the mercy of shadow. He didn't need to count. Didn't need to study the marks. The silence told him everything. Raiders, maybe, or worse. The kind of men who ride not for gold, but because the screaming fills something empty inside them. He moved without hurry, but not without care. His steps were quiet, though the dead had no ears. A small hand, still clutching the edge of a bonnet, poked out from beneath a blanket. Another man had fallen face first into the coals of a burned-out campfire. The stench of char and old gunpowder lingered in the air like smoke from a bad dream. Elijah knelt. Not to pray, he'd stopped believing words could undo such things, but to listen. And it was then, tucked behind the scorched remains of a wagon wheel, that he heard it. The faintest sound. A breath that was almost not a breath. A girl. No. A woman. Alive. She lay curled beneath a fur-lined cloak, face streaked with ash and blood, hair tangled like storm clouds. Her hand clutched at nothing, fingers twitching as if dreaming or dying. He bent down, let his hand hover near her face, and felt it, a whisper of warmth, fragile as a moth's wing. She was older than he'd expected. Not a girl from a Sunday school wagon, but a woman shaped by time. Her dress was fine, now torn, lace at the collar still stubbornly clinging to grace. One glove remained on her right hand, pearl buttons glinting faintly in the light. Her left was bare, knuckles scraped, fingers swollen. He didn't speak. There was no need. Instead, he slipped his arms beneath her, surprised by how little weight she carried, as though loss had already taken most of her. Her head fell lightly against his chest. For a moment, he thought she might open her eyes, but they remained closed. Lucy didn't protest as he mounted with her in his arms, though the old mare snorted at the scent of blood. The sun had nearly dipped below the horizon, smearing red across the land like a final warning. Elijah didn't look back. His cabin stood 5 miles to the west, tucked into the shoulder of a small hill, hidden beneath cottonwoods and silence. He built it 3 years ago with his own hands, after the sickness had taken Mary. Back then, building something felt like fighting back. Now it just felt like remembering. The fire was already going, low and orange, fed by the last of the sycamore logs. He laid her gently on the cot, her breath still faint but steady. He fetched water, ran a clean cloth over her wounds, then wrapped her fingers in oil-soaked linen. The blood had crusted like rust at the corner of her lip. He cleaned it without flinching. Night settled thick around them. Crickets began their solemn choir. Outside, an owl mourned the moon. Elijah sat beside her, back against the wall, long legs stretched out in front of him, arms crossed. He did not sleep. He only watched the rise and fall of her chest. Made sure she stayed. The next morning arrived slow, draped in mist and the smell of dew on warm dirt. She stirred. Just a flutter of her eyelids at first, then a sharp breath, as though waking inside a memory she didn't trust. Her eyes opened halfway, then fully, wide with confusion. She tried to speak. "Don't try," he said quietly. His voice was deep and worn, like a riverbed after flood season. "You're safe." She blinked, trying to focus, her gaze darting around the room. The wood stove, the single chair, the old portrait of a woman in a faded frame, Elijah's rifle leaning against the wall. She didn't speak again. Just nodded once. He brought her a tin cup of water. She drank with both hands trembling, as if she feared the cup might vanish before she finished. Afterward, she set it down carefully and looked at him, as though expecting something more. But he only stood, adjusting the blanket around her, then returned to the chair by the stove. "You got a name?" he asked, after some time. She looked down at her gloved hand. A long pause. Then, softly, "My name. I don't remember." That was a lie. He could feel it in the way her jaw tightened. But he didn't push. Everyone has their reasons. He nodded once. "Then I guess we'll wait till you do." For 2 days she said little else. Slept, mostly. Ate small spoonfuls of broth. Her hands remained clasped even in sleep. Once, she wept. Not loudly. Just a silent stream down her cheek as she stared at the ceiling. Elijah never asked why. He worked outside, cutting wood, feeding the animals. Came in only to check on her or sit by the fire. She began to notice the way he moved. Slow, intentional, without waste. Not cold. Not distant. Just quiet. Like a man who had learned long ago that the world listened best when spoken to gently. By the third morning, she was strong enough to walk to the door. He found her there, wrapped in his old coat, staring out across the prairie. The wind teased her hair, but she stood still. "You'll catch cold," he said, though his words didn't carry urgency. "I needed to see sky," she whispered. "To know the world still turns." "It does," he said, "whether we ask it to or not." She looked at him then, for the first time fully. Not through haze or pain. Her eyes were a color he couldn't name. Stormlight, maybe. There was something both noble and shattered in them. "I shouldn't be alive. Maybe. But you are." She turned back toward the hills, voice barely audible. "I don't know who I am now." He stood beside her, watching the wind move the tall grass. "Then don't rush it," he said. "Let it come when it's ready." They stood there, side by side, saying nothing more. But something passed between them, unspoken, unnamed. Not affection. Not yet. Just the first thread of trust, drawn thin as gossamer between two quiet hearts. And in the distance, far beyond the line of the hills, a crow lifted into the sky, its wings slicing through the dawn like a blade, and the land held its breath as if it, too, was waiting for what might come next. Morning sunlight spilled through the window in golden bands, catching on the dust that floated lazily in the quiet air. It gave the room a kind of hush, the kind one finds in old chapels or long-forgotten attics. The woman stirred beneath the wool blanket, eyes twitching behind shut lids, as though trying to escape a dream before it escaped her. Elijah was already at the stove, stirring something in a tin pot. His shoulders moved with the rhythm of a man used to long silences. He turned when he heard the slight rustle of blankets behind him, and for a moment, he just watched her. Her breathing had grown steadier over the last day, her cheeks less pale, but the bruise near her collarbone had darkened, blooming like violets under fragile skin. She blinked up at the ceiling, confusion swimming behind her eyes, as if unsure whether she had woken into another nightmare or something quieter. Her lips parted. No words came. "You're all right," Elijah said, voice gentle but firm. His hand hovered over the ladle like he'd forgotten it mid-stir. Her eyes moved slowly toward him. Recognition didn't light them. Nor did fear. Only tiredness. Heavy and bone-deep. "This is my place," he added. "You were the only one left. At the wagon site." There was a flicker in her face then. A crack in the calm. She sat up too fast, gasped, and clutched her side. "Easy. You've been through hell. You need rest more than answers." She looked at him again, this time differently. Appraising. Guarded. But not hostile. Her voice was hoarse when it came. "How long?" 3 nights. "You've been in and out." Her fingers reached for the edge of the blanket, as if it might tell her something about where she was, who she was. She looked down and paused. The lace on her wrist, singed but still intact. A delicate thing. Out of place in this weathered cabin. Her other glove was gone. "You took care of me. Did what I could." "Why?" He stirred the pot again, slowly. Because someone should've. She didn't answer. Just sat there, wrapped in stillness and the smell of broth. Her fingers brushed the side of her face, wincing at the tenderness. Elijah walked over, offered her the tin bowl. She hesitated before taking it. Their hands didn't touch. The soup was plain, potatoes and wild onion, but she ate with quiet gratitude. Between spoonfuls, her eyes drifted to the wooden walls, the hand-carved rocking chair, the boots by the door. Everything was modest, kept. This was a man who built things to last. He sat across from her, not watching her too hard, but not looking away either. "You got a name?" She swallowed slowly. Her eyes held his. "Not one I'd care to use." He nodded. Didn't press. "You." "Elijah. Elijah Peterson." The name felt strange in her mouth. She didn't say it aloud. Only tucked it somewhere behind her ribs, next to whatever was left of her name. He leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking softly under his weight. There was a rifle resting against the wall, and beside it, a small portrait of a woman. The frame had a chip in one corner. She glanced toward it, then quickly away. She tried standing. Her knees wobbled. He was at her side in an instant, hands steadying her without asking permission. She let him, only for a moment, then pulled away. Pride shimmered in her spine like steel. "I need air," she murmured. He opened the door and stepped aside. She moved slowly, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had once known how to walk in rooms that noticed her. Outside, the wind lifted strands of her hair, brushing her face like a forgotten lullaby. The prairie opened before them in all directions. Endless. Soft hills rolled toward a pale horizon. Wildflowers stubbornly pushed through the dust near the fence posts. Somewhere, a hawk called out, circling above the cottonwoods like a sentinel. She took it in like a first breath. Then, beneath it all, her voice again. "They killed everyone, didn't they?" "Yes." She didn't cry, didn't tremble, only stood, watching the sky like it might offer absolution. "Did you bury them?" "I marked them best I could. Storm came before I could finish." She nodded once, her throat working around silence. Elijah watched her without intruding. She wasn't the sort you rushed. The wind picked up slightly. She wrapped his coat tighter around her shoulders. Its weight was comforting, oddly fitting despite its bulk. "You're not from here," he said after a while. "No." "Where, then?" "A long way off. Accent says east. Dress says something else. You speak like a man who used to care and stopped trying." He didn't smile, but something like acknowledgement passed between them. "Used to be someone's husband," he said softly. "Mary." She passed. "I never much left the cabin after that." Her face softened. Not with pity, but a flicker of familiarity. As if grief was a language only certain people truly understood. "I was on my way to a place I didn't want to go," she said. "That wagon was never going to take me anywhere I hadn't already lost." "You're running." She met his eyes. "Aren't we all?" He looked out toward the hills, the way the clouds leaned their shadows across the land. "I'm not running anymore," he said. "Just waiting for the world to settle." She considered that, then turned toward the cabin. "I'd like to stay a while," she said. "Not long. Just while I remember how to breathe." His answer was simple. "You can." That night, she helped peel potatoes. Her hands were unsteady, fingers still stiff with bruises, but she worked through it. He watched her hands more than her face, saw the way she moved with muscle memory rather than comfort. When she finished, she leaned back in the chair and exhaled like someone who just climbed a hill. He poured her tea without asking. "You got a husband?" "Had he die?" "No." She didn't explain. He didn't ask. They sat in silence, the fire casting long shadows on the floor. She traced the edge of the tin cup with her fingertip. He carved a new handle for a broken drawer. The world outside could have been a million miles away. Before bed, she paused at the door of the small side room. The guest cot was neatly made, wool blanket folded with care. She turned to him. "You don't ask many questions." I don't believe in earning trust with noise. She nodded. Then after a pause, "Thank you, Elijah." His name sounded different coming from her, like it had been dressed in silk and memory. "Good night, ma'am." She almost smiled. But not yet. That night, she dreamt of salt water and long staircases, of ballrooms echoing with names she no longer answered to. But when she woke, all she saw was the glow of embers and the steady shadow of a man who kept his promises with silence. She would not call it safety. Not yet. But for the first time in many long days, she did not dread the morning. And somewhere outside, just beyond the rise, a single wild horse stood under moonlight, ears flicking toward the cabin, as if it too was waiting to see what would become of this strange, broken peace. The days began to stretch like thread pulled between fingers, quiet, slow, purposeful. There was no talk of the massacre, no mention of names or pasts, and still, somehow, the air between them thickened with meaning. Elijah rose early each morning, the sun not yet crested, his boots already dusted from the path to the barn. She, still nameless, still watchful, watched from the window with a cup of coffee in her hands, steam curling like smoke signals she never sent. They had fallen into rhythm without trying. He would chop wood. She would gather kindling. He would hunt, bringing back rabbits or the occasional grouse. She would skin them with shaking hands, growing steadier by the day. No one called it healing. No one said the word peace. It was simply motion. And motion, in grief, was salvation. One morning, as the first light filtered through the lace she had sewn across the windowsill, she set to kneading dough. Elijah had brought flour from town the week before, setting the sack down with an awkward gentleness, like he wasn't sure whether it would be welcome. She hadn't said thank you then. She said it now, silently, with her hands in the dough, flour streaked across her wrists like chalky prayers. He returned that afternoon to the smell of bread warming the cabin. He paused at the door before entering, eyes closed, breathing it in. Something in him trembled, not visibly, but deep in the marrow, the way a tree trembles in wind too soft to see. When he stepped inside, he found her with her back to him, humming something old and wordless, the sleeves of her blouse rolled just past her elbows. She glanced at him and said nothing. Instead, she cut him a piece of bread, handed it over with a cloth-wrapped hand, and turned away again. He ate in silence, slowly, letting the crust crackle beneath his teeth. It was imperfect, burnt at the edges, but tasted like belonging. They ate that evening by lamplight, 2 tin plates, 2 sets of hands worn thin by different kinds of sorrow. He spoke first, voice low. "It's good." She looked at him and then down at her hands. "I wasn't sure I remembered how. It'll come back. Maybe not all of it. Enough, though." He looked across the table, into her face lit only by flame and shadow. Her eyes had changed. Less startled. Still wary. But like the prairie itself, learning to trust the rain again. The next week brought storms. The kind that roll in from nowhere, darkening the sky in minutes and shaking the windows in their frames. She stood by the fireplace as thunder rumbled like ancient hooves across the plain. He was by the door, latching it tight. When the wind moaned, she flinched, so quick it barely registered. But he saw. He moved toward her without sound, took a wool shawl from the peg and draped it across her shoulders. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. They stood like that for a while, staring into the hearth, the wind like a voice pressed against the walls. She whispered something then, not to him, not even to herself, really. Just out loud. "In another life, I think I lived near the sea." He didn't ask which one, or whether she missed it. He only replied, after a beat, "I never seen the sea. Closest I got was a river that moved too fast to cross." She tilted her head slightly, surprised by the image, and for the first time, something close to a smile curled at the corner of her mouth. She found a piano in town, weeks later. Not a grand thing, but upright and aged, hiding in the back of the general store like a sleeping relic. The shopkeep had no use for it and offered it for half the cost of a decent saddle. Elijah paid without bartering. When he rolled it into the cabin on a borrowed cart, she stared at it as though he'd rolled in a piece of her. She didn't play the first night. She dusted it, ran her fingers along the yellowing keys. That was enough. The next night, he came in from chopping and heard notes drifting through the door. Soft, hesitant, not yet brave. She didn't look up as he entered, didn't stop. The melody was half-formed, fragile, but there was something sacred in it. Elijah leaned against the wall and let it move through him. It wasn't just music. It was memory, offered like a hand outstretched across distance. Afterward, she kept her hand on the keys and asked, "Did you know music could feel like breath?" He nodded, slow. "Only when it stops." Their days began to fill. Not with noise, not with busyness, but with purpose. She began to sew curtains, little patches to soften the edges of the room. He carved new handles for the drawers. She brought in flowers, just sprigs of prairie bloom, and set them in jars. He built her a bench for the piano. One morning, she read aloud from a book she'd found tucked behind the hearth. French poetry, its pages worn but intact. He didn't understand a word, but listened anyway, eyes closed, the cadence of her voice like water slipping over stones. When she finished, he said simply, "I don't know what you said, but I think it meant something." "It did," she said. That night, she left her glove on the table. Just one. The bare skin of her hand felt like something shared, rather than exposed. He asked her to walk with him the next evening, just to the ridge beyond the barn. She agreed, tying her shawl over her shoulders. They didn't speak much. They walked side by side, steps in rhythm, the prairie sighing around them. At the top, they paused. The sky spread wide, clouds smeared in orange and lavender. A coyote called out somewhere far off. "This land feels like it never ends," she said. "It don't. Not really. How do you live with that?" "You don't. You let it live with you." She looked at him then, and something flickered in her chest. Not affection, not yet, but a steadiness. Like stone beneath her feet. When they returned, the light in the cabin was warm. She reached for the door, then paused. "Why did you buy the piano?" He hesitated. Then, "I saw your hands, that first day. The way you moved them when you thought no one was watching. They were meant to touch something that remembers." Her breath caught. She stepped inside before she could speak, and he let her go. That night, she dreamt again. But not of blood, not of smoke. She dreamt of linen hung in sea wind, of fingers dancing over ivory keys, of a man who listened without demanding. When she woke, her eyes found his shape in the rocker by the window, book unopened in his lap. "Elijah." She hesitated. Then, "I used to be called Evelyn." He looked up, met her gaze. "Used to be? I don't know what I am now." He nodded slowly, like someone who knew better than to force a thing into certainty. "Then we'll find out together." The room held its breath. And then, quietly, it exhaled. The morning came silver and cold, with frost clinging to the tall grass like secret promises. Elijah stepped outside with his rifle slung across his back and a coil of rope in his hand, eyes scanning the sky as though expecting it to offer some kind of sign. Evelyn stood in the doorway, a shawl draped over her shoulders, steam rising from the cup in her hand. She no longer startled when he moved without sound. She no longer flinched when shadows passed over her sleep. But something unspoken still lingered between them, soft as breath, sharp as truth not yet told. They had carved out a rhythm, days folded into each other like linens pressed by hand. Bread in the mornings, music in the evenings, walks to the ridge. She had begun to laugh, not often and never loud, but it came like spring water, unexpected and pure. He watched her differently now, not out of caution, but out of quiet reverence. He had come to know the line of her jaw, the way her fingers tightened when she was thinking, how she paused before saying his name as though tasting the shape of it each time. And yet, even as things warmed between them, her past remained untouched, sealed like a letter kept in a locked drawer. That day, she planned to ride to town for flour and thread. She had not gone alone before. He hesitated when she suggested it. "You sure you're ready?" "I need to try," she said. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "I want to feel normal. Just for a few hours." He nodded, slowly. If anything troubles you, leave it and come back. Nothing in that town is worth more than your peace." She looked at him then, full and clear, and gave a small, grateful smile. "I'll be all right." It was near noon when she reached town. The general store sat as it always had, squat and sun-faded, with the same bell above the door that rattled like a dry cough. The usual faces passed her: miners, ranch wives, boys with slingshots at their belts, but none paid her much mind. That, she realized, was what she'd been afraid of. Not recognition. The opposite. She took her time, moved slowly down the aisles. The sound of boots on old floorboards, the rustle of sacks, the murmur of lives smaller than the one she once fled. It was near the back, near the tin of hairpins, that she heard it. A voice, unfamiliar but sharp with memory. "My God, is that—" She turned. A man stood at the counter, mid-conversation, his eyes locked on her with sudden intensity. His clothes were dusty but fine, his accent too polished for these parts. His eyes widened. "Baroness, it is you." The word fell like a stone into a still pond. She didn't speak. Her breath caught, hands stiff at her sides. He took a step forward, eyes still locked on her, confusion and recognition fighting for place on his face. "We thought you dead. Your uncle sent letters everywhere. You were supposed to—" "I am not that woman anymore," she said, voice low and hard. He blinked. "But what are you doing here? Dressed like a housemaid?" "I am no one," she said, "and I suggest you leave me be." He stared another long moment, then nodded, stunned, as if he'd seen a ghost and wasn't entirely sure he hadn't. She turned and walked out, bread forgotten on the counter, thread still clutched in her fist. Elijah knew something had changed the moment she returned. Her gait was tight, precise. Her face unreadable, eyes like a door bolted shut. He didn't speak as she unsaddled the horse. Didn't ask what was wrong. Only followed her back into the cabin and waited. She stood by the fireplace, her back to him, staring at the coals. "Someone recognized me." His voice was even. "What did they call you?" "Baroness." He waited. "My full name is Evelyn Darmoy, daughter of the late Lord Adrian Darmoy, heir to the line of Marseille." He said nothing, but the weight of the truth settled into the room like the onset of storm. She went on. "I was meant to marry a man chosen by my uncle. I did not love him. He did not care. I was currency. That's all we are in houses like mine. I ran. I bought my passage under another name. That wagon was meant to take me far enough that no one would ever call me that again." She turned then, eyes fierce and fragile. "I never meant to lie to you. You didn't. I never told you the truth. You were surviving. That's not the same thing." She watched him for a long moment, chest rising and falling. "You aren't surprised? I'm not the kind of man people lie to because they think he'd understand. I'm the kind they lie to because they think he'd forgive them when they finally can't." The fire cracked behind her. She stepped closer, eyes searching his. "And do you?" He looked at her, full of something vast and aching. "There ain't anything to forgive. I saw you. Before you said a word." She shook her head, barely. "You saw a woman you wanted to fix." "No. I saw a woman who didn't need fixing, only room to stop running." Her eyes shimmered then, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. "I don't know who I am without that name. But I also can't carry it anymore. You don't have to. Then who am I? You're the woman who plays piano with her whole soul, who burns bread but tries again, who sleeps with one hand in a fist and the other in prayer. That's who you are." Her breath broke. She stepped into him, hands trembling. "Do you think I could stay here? Just as Evelyn?" He reached out, slowly, as if not to scare the moment away. Brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "You already have." That night, she did not sleep in the side room. She stood beside his bed, unsure. He didn't beckon, didn't move. Only watched her, patient. "I'm not asking for more than rest," she whispered. You don't owe me more." She slipped beneath the covers, the cotton rough against her skin, but the space beside him warm. They lay facing the ceiling. Neither touched the other. Their closeness was not built of hunger but shelter. When she drifted off, he whispered, "You're safe." And in the dark, she finally believed it. The next morning, Evelyn rose before him, the sun just beginning to draw color into the cabin. She moved quietly through the kitchen, slicing apples, grinding coffee. When Elijah stirred and sat up, she was already waiting at the table. She looked at him fully, and for the first time since she'd spoken her name, she didn't flinch. "I don't want to hide," she said. "Then don't." He reached for his coffee, the moment between them steady and clear. "The world may still find me. My uncle may send others. Men who know how to make women disappear. Then I reckon they'll have to come through me." She looked down, smiled faintly. "That's no small promise. It's not made small." They ate together, talked about nothing important. The sky, the foxes near the henhouse, whether winter would come early. But something had shifted, something holy in its plainness. Evelyn had stopped running. Elijah had started hoping. That afternoon, he brought her to the cottonwood tree near the edge of the property. It stood like a sentinel, its limbs long and open. She watched the leaves move, felt the breeze touch her cheek. "Why here?" "Because this is where I buried Mary's ring. I figured if I ever loved someone again, I'd bring her here and tell her the truth." "And what's that?" "That I thought I was done living. That I thought I'd already seen every kind of love there was. But then you came in with ashes on your cheeks and silence like armor, and you taught me there's still more." Her breath caught. She pressed a hand to his chest. "Say that again." "There's still more." She leaned into him, forehead to his shoulder, the wind wrapping around them both. "I think I'm in love with you, Elijah Peterson. I know I am, Evelyn Darmoy." And as the sun dipped behind the ridge, they stood beneath that tree, not as a baroness and a widower, but as two souls who had named their grief and still dared to stay. The future was still unknown. But neither of them turned away. The sky that morning was so blue it seemed painted, broad, unwavering, stretching from horizon to horizon like something sacred. Evelyn stood at the water pump, sleeves rolled up, boots pressed into the damp dirt. Her fingers turned the handle with an easy rhythm, water flowing into a tin bucket that already shimmered with light. A year ago, she'd never touched a pump in her life. Now, it was second nature. Now, it was peace. Elijah came from the barn, shirt rolled at the elbows, carrying a bundle of cedar wood in one arm. The horses had been fed, the fence checked, and he'd repaired the broken gate hinge with nothing but a bent nail and persistence. He paused as he neared her, watching the way the sunlight caught in her loose braid. She looked over her shoulder, smiling slightly, that soft and knowing way she had when she was happiest. "You're watching me again," she said. "I never really stopped," he replied. They shared the morning that way, unspoken things flowing between them like water. Simple, clean, full of the kind of stillness earned only through long storms. Evelyn cooked breakfast with ease now, cracking eggs into the skillet with one hand, flipping cornbread like she'd been raised to do it. Elijah watched her, always a little astonished that she had chosen to stay, that the Baroness of Marseille now lived in a wooden cabin on the western edge of nowhere, barefoot and humming French lullabies over a stovetop fire. After breakfast, he took her hand and led her to the ridge. Their ridge. It was where they'd first stood together under the lavender sky, where her name had returned to her and where his silence had finally found words. At the top, the cottonwood tree waited, tall and swaying. Beneath it, a small stone sat, smooth and unmarked. Evelyn crouched beside it, brushing her fingers over the weathered surface. "You ever going to carve something into it?" she asked, voice tender. "Thought about it," he replied. "But sometimes things don't need telling. Sometimes the truth just lives there, quiet as anything." She looked up at him, and her eyes were brighter than they'd been in weeks. "You always did understand silence," she said. "And you always filled it with music." They were still there when they saw the horse. It came from the east, its rider hunched and fast, dust curling behind him like smoke from a dry fire. Elijah tensed before Evelyn did. He watched the way the man moved in the saddle, too hurried, too practiced. He didn't look like a settler or a merchant. He looked like someone searching. Evelyn rose slowly, her fingers tightening around the shawl draped over her shoulders. "You know him?" Elijah asked. "No," she said. But something in her eyes was already withdrawing. The rider slowed as he neared the cabin, dismounting with careless ease. He stood a little too straight, wore a revolver that shone too brightly, and moved like a man who'd been told what he wanted was already his. His gaze swept the cabin, the fence, the barn, and then found them atop the ridge. He smiled, small and practiced. "Evelyn," he called, as though tasting the name in his mouth. She said nothing. "Elijah Peterson," the man said next, tipping his hat as if it were courtesy rather than threat. "Mighty fine place you've built here." Elijah stepped slightly in front of her. "What's your business?" "My business is family," the man said, resting a hand on his belt. "Yours." "Mine." "Hers." "She don't belong to anyone," Elijah said. The man tilted his head. "You know, the Darmoy name reaches far. There's people back east still expecting her return. Important people. She's a baroness, after all. And she left debts unpaid." "I owe nothing," Evelyn said, stepping forward now, shoulders straight. "I gave up that name when I left. And if they're sending you, they must be desperate." He looked at her, then at Elijah. "They think you've been taken, or bewitched, or worse. But they were wrong. You're just hiding." Evelyn shook her head. "No, I was hiding. I'm not anymore." The man took a slow step closer. Elijah didn't move. The wind had stilled entirely now, as if the world were holding its breath. "You're not coming for her," Elijah said. "Not now. Not ever." The man glanced at his revolver. "You going to stop me?" Elijah didn't answer. He didn't need to. The air around him had changed. Not aggressive, never that, but rooted. Immovable. The kind of strength that came not from violence but from conviction. Evelyn stepped beside him. Not behind. Not shielded. Beside. "She's not going," Elijah said again. "She's chosen her life. You can ride back and tell them that. Or you can stay and find out what it means to threaten someone who's got nothing left to lose." The man considered him, face unreadable. Then he looked again at Evelyn. "You're wasting your title," he said. "Your legacy." "I'm living," she replied. "That's more than I ever did under that name." The man's jaw tightened. But something in her voice, or the silence that followed it, reached him. He looked away, spat into the dirt, and without another word, turned and mounted his horse. He rode off the way he came, dust curling once more in his wake. When he disappeared over the horizon, Evelyn exhaled. It was not relief. It was release. Back at the cabin, she sat by the piano, fingers trembling slightly. Elijah made tea without asking. When he returned, she played a few notes, soft and uncertain. "You all right?" he asked. "I think so," she said. "But I need to do something." She went to the back of the cabin, pulled open the chest where she'd stored her past, what little she hadn't burned. From beneath folded linens, she drew out a gold ring set with a pale blue stone. It caught the light like it remembered who it once belonged to. She walked with it to the cottonwood tree. Elijah followed without question. She knelt, dug a shallow hole with her hands, and placed the ring there, folding earth over it slowly, carefully. Then she rose and looked to Elijah. "That part of me is buried now. I don't want it back." He didn't speak, just stepped forward and took her hand. They walked back in silence, but it wasn't the silence of secrets. It was the kind that comes after truth, after the dust has settled and the heart has found its beat again. That night, the stars came early. Evelyn stood on the porch, wrapped in his coat, staring up at them. "I used to think the sky was too big," she said, "that I'd get lost in it." He came to stand beside her. "And now?" I think I've found someone to hold it with. He touched her hand, gently. I never thought I'd love again, he said. Never thought I'd want to. But you, Evelyn, you didn't save me with noise. You saved me with staying. She turned to him, eyes full of every word she hadn't yet said. Elijah, she whispered. Marry me. He looked at her, not surprised, not uncertain. Just certain in a way only those who've already lost everything can be. Yes, he said. I'd marry you 1,000 times, in 1,000 lifetimes. And in the quiet prairie night, beneath a sky wide enough for second chances, they kissed. Not as a baroness and a widower, not as survivors, but as two souls who had chosen each other beyond title, beyond tragedy, beyond the noise of the world. They married a week later, under the cottonwood tree, with only the wind and the birds to witness it. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself. He wore a clean shirt and his father's boots. They said no vows. They didn't need them. Their whole story had already been a vow. After the ceremony, they sat on the porch, hands entwined, watching the sun melt into the earth. You think the past will ever come back? She asked. Maybe, Elijah said. But if it does, it won't find us waiting. No, she said. It'll find us living. And as the stars returned, blinking open one by one, the land around them seemed to lean in, warm and vast, as if holding its arms out to two souls who had dared not just to survive, but to stay, to love, and to begin again.